All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. This is our first Illinois chapter remote CTTC meeting. So thank you everyone for calling in. We are going to do a couple of polls throughout this presentation, and then we do have a survey at the end. Part of that is just us trying to figure out if these events are of interest to everyone, and if if we want to maybe change the time frame a little bit. I know that this kind of creeping into nighttime, and we're not offering dinner like we usually do during our CTTC events. So thank you for everyone for being flexible. We're in a whole new world here. When we first laid out our CTTC program for the beginning of the year, one of my goals as president was to incorporate more collaboration opportunities between different organizations. And the BCA has a central chapter, and we had thought that this would be a nice event to be able to do some networking between the two organizations in person. And obviously someone laughed at that idea and didn't want it to be. So we're networking virtually tonight, and hopefully next year we can maybe do something in person again. So thank you again for everyone. I want to introduce our speaker. We have Tom Poeling. He's the Project Support Director for U.S. Engineering Construction. They're a top 25 mechanical contractor nationally. He has more than 27 years of industry experience with a background in energy efficiency and building commissioning. He's the immediate past president of the Building Commissioning Association. The BCA is a professional organization that strives to raise awareness of building commissioning and to empower commissioning providers, building owners, and others to optimize the built environment. We are excited to have Tom here with us. So Tom, I will let you take it away. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fiona. I appreciate very much the opportunity to come in and speak to you a little bit about a study that we did with the Building Commissioning Association last year. So want to give you some of the results that came from that study that is all about the value of building commissioning. And so I'm going to hit you with a ton of data this evening in rapid succession. We'll talk a lot about data as far as how commissioning stakeholders promote the industry. So when we say stakeholders, that isn't just providers, that's design engineers, owners reps, contractors, vendors, the whole 9 yards. So the data will be broken down into cost information, some stuff about the market as far as how does commissioning affect the market, and then also some scope. So when you talk about the commissioning scope of work, we were looking for some feedback, as far as how effective the commissioning scope was going to be. So,
Tom, before we get started, I forgot, I'm sorry, that we were going to do a couple of quick polls actually before we started. So I just launched one poll. So everyone should be able to submit your responses, but basically we're looking just to see kind of what the group of attendees are between design engineers, commissioning providers, sales reps, and other. And then we actually have one more poll after this that I'll launch where we are looking just to see if people are a little bit more interested in new construction commissioning survey results versus the existing building commissioning results. We will be addressing both of those in today's presentation. So I think still got a few people responding. Tom, can you see the results?
I cannot see the results. I just see the poll questions.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to, so far we've got 27% design engineers, 39% commissioning providers, 15% sales reps, and 19% other. So I'm gonna close, and actually I can share that. So there's our results. And then, all right, and then our next poll is going to be which topic you might be more interested in. So I'll give everyone just a couple minutes to respond to that.
I do appreciate the ability to get feedback. You know, polling is a little bit of a pain when it comes to the tech side, but it is useful information, help to craft the presentation.
Okay, all right.
I would also say, well, I probably also would say that we would like to get your questions. You know, I'm going to go fast, but I guess I would say, and it probably was already said, that if you had a question as we were going through, you would just go ahead and throw it in the chat function, and then Fiona will obviously cut me off and tell me to take a breath, and then we'll go through some of the questions as we go. So.
All right, I'm going to close this and share results. So we're pretty dead even split, which is great. So with that, I think you can resume, Tom.
Okay. Get back to my.
There you go.
Thank you. So let's talk about the study. So Lawrence Berkeley National Labs put out a landmark study back in 2004 that was about the cost effectiveness of building commissioning. And then they refreshed that data in 2009. And so many of us that were in the commissioning industry, when you Google the value of commissioning, these are the documents that typically hit the top. So, which is great. We're always, as commissioning providers, we're always trying to justify the value of our services, right? So, so here it was 2016, 2017 as a Building Commissioning Association. We decided to pursue this study, to do another round of it for a couple of reasons. One, by that time the data was getting close to 10 years old, and so we wanted to make sure that we were, we were showing the changes in the industry. So the approach to commissioning is evolving. Example would be the use of ongoing commissioning more and more. The economics around how providers are selling their services, things like that. We wanted to try to capture that. We were fortunate enough in the study that we were able to continue to partner with Berkeley National Labs, and if you've ever dealt with researchers, you'll know that they are very adamant that you maintain consistency in your data set, which I didn't appreciate at first because it made the survey questions ungodly long. But in the end, I appreciated it because you could see year over year or survey over survey how the changes happen. So it was important with our goals to try to maintain or to try to set a new baseline for commissioning metrics, and to try to build more of an iterative process for how we're going to gather this data. Our intent is to try to reach out every couple of years and just continue to refresh now that we've learned how to do these surveys and do them better and better. So, so one of the I think the key metrics for us when we set out to do the study in 2018 was we wanted to gather at least as much data as was gathered in previous surveys. So here's the tail of the tape as far as the number of buildings, square footage, construction costs, those sort of things, right? So, and it's broken up into two pieces. There's the new construction commissioning, is the upper half, and the existing building commissioning data that we gathered. So we sent a survey out to multiple audiences. So we polled different utility programs that had databases for these kinds of services. We polled our own members. We sent kind of blind surveys out to a number of different data sets. So the good news, at least from our standpoint, was we felt like we were able to gather at least as much data as far as the number of buildings. So we had basically 20-ish, 15 to 20% more buildings, more square footage, and the higher construction costs. All of that just to try to validate, that we had enough data to be able to say, as we compare it to the old studies, we were in the same ballpark. So let's start looking at new construction commissioning. We'll look at a couple of factors, but let's start off on the cost side, right? The first question you always get asked is, what does commissioning cost? So in 2018, we were able to pull a bunch of information together. We lined up the data. We polled almost 70 projects, and we were able to see that the median price point, cost per square foot of commissioning services on a wide variety of things came in. So a median price of about 82 cents a square foot and a mean cost of $1 $1.06 a square foot, right? So if we were to compare that to the 2009 survey results, we could see that it was lower, and that's also the graph on the right. So the yellow is the 09 results in its full spread, right? 25, the whisker graph showing the mins and the maxes and the means, and so everything was higher in 09. And so you would be led to believe that commissioning is getting way more affordable than it used to be. And so that's where we start to add disclaimers to the study to say, well, let's look at the data and just see what it's trying to tell us. So the first thing we looked at was building distribution, building size specifically. So in looking at the information we got back, 09 is in the bottom, 18 is at the top. So what we recognize is the buildings that we gathered data on, and they weren't the same ones, obviously. So we were able to gather fairly close to the same number of buildings, but they were by and large a much larger square footage. So the mean is 232,000 square feet versus 114,000 square feet. So that obviously skews the numbers that we're getting. Another aspect that we looked at was building type. So in the original study, there were a number of different building types that followed DOE guidelines, and we were able to get data for some building types more than others. So across the bottom, the ones that are a little more active were things like healthcare, office buildings, K-12 schools, higher education. Those are the ones that are outlined there. There were a number of other kind of outliers, things like laboratories, warehouses, public gathering places, things like that. So it was a mix of the data that we got back. And so in looking at the cost per building type, we generally felt like that we had enough data to really trust 4 of the building types. So higher education, office, healthcare, and K-12 schools, we felt like we were getting data sets that were more than just a handful. And so we could make maybe a little stronger recommendation of where those are at. So you can kind of see there the spread of the number of buildings that we got in both the 09 and the 18 studies individually, and then the costs that were associated then with each one of those. And as with any study and any statistical analysis, right, there are outliers and there's stories behind the stories. So again, all of this is a disclaimer to be able to say deeper in the numbers and say, for example, if we looked at office space, we had still a generous number of buildings in both scenarios. And in that case, the office cost per square foot went up from 57 cents a square foot to 82 cents a square foot. On the K-12 school scenario, it stayed pretty consistent. So we went from 82 cents a square foot 10 years ago to 85 cents a square foot. So some things are mature. School commissioning is a fairly mature process, right? So we felt like that's what is outlined in the data we were getting back. Some things are not so mature, right? So things of like laboratories, for example, and higher education, some pretty big outliers as far as cost per square foot, right? So $8 a square foot was probably a couple of projects, obviously with just 3 of them that were really driving that number. So not probably the most reliable. So we have more data tied to higher education, tied at a little better price point. So we have kind of different layers to the onion that we pull back. And so overall kind of conclusions to that is that new construction costs per square foot do appear to be lower, but big disclaimer here, you got to look at, if somebody asks you to provide a cost, the key word is always, well, it depends, right? It depends on square footage, it depends on the building type, it depends on the equipment, it depends on the approach, blah, 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 right? Not a surprise to the providers that are on the line. And so certainly those rules still apply. But when you get that, that phone call, saying, hey, I need to know generally what the ranges are, certainly we would recommend you use the range, and get some of those disclaimers. We were interested in the fact of, is price really driving the market? And so we had a couple of different other data points, that would indicate that we were seeing about 40% of the work that was provided in the surveys was selected, the the work was selected based on qualifications, not just on price. So obviously price-based RFPs are still, still a very big piece of the procurement puzzle, but it's not everything. And so, like I said, the disclaimer is just be careful how you throw out the cost per square foot number, because there's reasons behind the numbers. So
Tom, we had one poll question we wanted to interject. Which of these markets have you engaged with new construction commissioning? I did get some feedback on the poll. There were some of you that were having issues responding. If you exit out of full screen mode, you should be able to make your selection. So if you're having trouble, try that as an option. We'll give everyone a minute to answer this, and then we're actually going to ask the same question again when we get into the existing building commissioning. Okay, I think everyone has responded. So wide diversity again, mostly in higher education for this group, office spaces, and then a lot of healthcare and K-12. So I think I let people multiple choice this one also, but all right.
well, that's fair, because a lot of people do multiple types of projects. So, yep, I think that's a fairly accurate depiction of what we see within our membership. So the next slide is market demand. So the questions really of this section revolve around what's driving the owner's needs for procuring new construction commissioning. So with this particular survey result, we asked owners, okay, what are the reasons that that drive commissioning? And so as you can imagine, a lot of it was the owners itself, kind of Captain Obvious there. But codes and rating programs and policies certainly did have a piece of what was driving commissioning to happen, right? So regulatory issues are driving it. However, the good news is that it's owner demand that is top of the heap. So in drilling down a little deeper, we're talking about, okay, what are the reasons that an owner would want to implement new construction commissioning? So it's kind of three pieces of the puzzle. The green pieces are really, I mean, the things over 50% response, right? So the owners are still doing commissioning because they want to ensure system performance. They want their buildings to work, right? They want better training. But there's still, like I said, there's always been that aspect of we want the buildings to work, we want it to be efficient and all that kind of stuff. There's still this mandate part of LEED or sustainable rating systems. There's organizational mandates and policies that are a tier of that scenario. The interesting thing was, as you go down below, right in the yellow, it's kind of the standard, right? Wouldn't you think that you want a building to have good indoor air quality, good energy savings, good productivity, those kind of productivity factors? In the survey, that wasn't really the next, that was a second tier kind of selection when it came to what was driving owners to procure it. And then other things at the bottom, which weren't really big drivers, so rebates and other things, which probably talks about the maturity of the market, where there's not much of an incentive. It's sort of business as usual, right? Commissioning has been around for about 30 years, so it's starting to get mature that way. Some things in terms of the survey over survey results. So some things that are getting more popular. So some of the organizational or some of the regulatory responses is driving things more now than it did 10, 12 years ago. And certainly turnover of buildings, making sure they work out of the chute. That's still a high demand as far as owners' needs. And again, we talked a little bit about it. Things about indoor air quality, energy savings, thermal comfort, training of facilities. The things that were maybe more hot buttons back in 2009 are still there. There's still that second tier to a degree, but they're not what's driving the ship. as far as why an owner would go out to do it. There's probably lots of reasons for that. Some of them would be in terms of things like, the other factors like energy codes and other, the work that the very people on this phone call, right, the work that you're doing is sort of becoming, like I said, business as usual, right? So we would expect to get into air quality and energy savings and thermal comfort out of a building. Why would I need commissioning to do it, right? It's not the factor, it's just one of the factors. So the other side of it too is, okay, well, let's talk about what kind of non-energy benefits come out of new construction commissioning. So there's, again, kind of the cost piece of it, or the first cost scenarios, and then the kind of the ongoing life cycle kinds of things. The interesting thing I think out of this particular graph is what's driving, but this is a scenario. The last couple of slides are all about an owner is buying commissioning services. Why would they do it? This particular slide is, okay, the owner already bought it. What, when they did the autopsy on the project, what came out of it, right? What kind of benefit did they see out of it? So what it's showing is that benefits of schedule. So schedule was a big piece, right? Commissioning is didn't go into it necessarily for that, but that's what we achieved. Is commissioning did help to drive schedule. It helped to improve, collaborate on system design, help to collaborate on construction team issues. We've always been big on warranty callbacks and reducing change orders and stuff like that. That still is showing up in the surveys as a result when it comes to something that's cost specific. Now, the interesting thing is when you look at the ongoing improvements, that's where the stuff we talked about, the thermal comfort, the maintenance, the building should work, right? That's still there. So we're still seeing that commissioning results in that information, results in that scenario, even if it wasn't necessarily, a high point of the buy, right? A couple of slides in talking about just so with commissioning, there's multiple tasks in our scope of work. There's kind of a best practice of what you should expect to see from a commissioning provider in a scope. So here are kind of the top 15 or so. So in looking at, okay, we talked to our providers and said, well, what are you providing? So there was typically the core tasks that everybody provides. We develop a plan, we do inspections, functional testing, a little bit of training. Everybody gets a report. It's code required. So that part doesn't, that's what we kind of always did and didn't really change. What I thought was interesting was to look at the things that we don't do as often, or as the things that are less, right? So we really try to push hard on commissioning being upfront and being a part of developing design intent, or at least what we call the owner project requirements. And so that's being done, less than half of the time, based on our surveys. One real benefit, I think, also with commissioning is getting involved with the creation of the controls submittals and helping to bridge that gap between what was the control, what was the design engineer's design intent when it comes to controls versus what did the owner really want from their control sequences or their graphics packages or whatever, to the game of telephone of what did the controls contractor really hear, right? Did they just cut and paste, or that kind of stuff, right? So I could do a whole hour on just control submittal coordination meetings, but the problem is we don't do it as often as we probably should. So opportunity there. The energy side of it I thought was interesting, right? I thought energy would drive new construction commissioning. It doesn't yet. Cost savings was not a part of new construction commissioning, which I think is an opportunity. And then the other question is ongoing commissioning. More and more of it is being done, so we're looking for market penetration. We're seeing that ongoing commissioning is in the scope about a third of the time, which is more than, we weren't tracking it at all 12 years ago. So it's another point in our scenario. So when you look at market factors, so just a summary, owner awareness is still our highest driving factor, but regulation and code still driving the demand for commissioning. Lots of benefits that are non-energy. So the top ones were schedule improvement, smooth turnover, collaboration, training, things like that. The building performance metrics has lost some of its emphasis, but still part of projects. We still do the core scope of work, but there's opportunity to do other things better from our side. What are we making sure that we want to add value to the overall delivery of the project? So these are sort of things that we could be doing better. Any questions on any of that, Fiona, that you're hearing?
No questions.
Okay.
Yeah, we did have one poll question. It was kind of fun. We were going to ask, as a designer or a writer, would you prefer, let me launch it, to sample or to have all terminal units for thermal comfort and control?
Of course, we don't ask the
We
question
should have included a caveat for if
what,
you were a designer or commissioning professional.
Yeah, the question is budget, obviously, is part of it, which we
don't have any other
part of
questions
this issue.
at this time.
But in terms of your perceived value of what that could be, that's kind of where we're at. So.
2/3 to sample, the rest to test them all.
Okay, I think that's a reasonable response from an educated crowd. Okay, so get back to the slide. All right, so just as a final conversation around new construction commissioning, I want to talk a little bit about scope of work observations. So we did a sample, or we sent out the surveys, and we talked about specific effectiveness of pieces of the scope of work tied to new construction commissioning. So the first couple questions relate to design phase construction, new construction commissioning. So ask the question, okay, what percentage of projects overall, new construction, have design phase commissioning services? So survey basically, broken out, and these were not super scientific. They were sort of just, here's 5 possible multiple choice answers. Basically, what we came back with, kind of the general weighted average of a little more than half, about 60% of them will have some form or fashion of design phase commissioning services included. We talked about OPRs briefly before. So the question is, how many times is OPRs developed for your projects? So again, we had a little better response on this particular second survey, where the weighted average overall is about 47%, but still a fair amount of responses. The biggest response is in the less than 20% of my projects do I have OPRs. So again, some work to do there. Percentage of commissioning issues that are discovered during design phase. So the question is, where's the value of commissioning? Where do you get the benefit? Do you get it? And the answer, the spoiler alert, is a lot of it is during the functional testing of the systems at the very last 10 to 20% of the job. But the question we've always had is, well, what benefit is design phase? The cost point is not very high. And so if you look at just the overall issues discovered on a project, we found that about 25% of those overall issues were found during the design phase. So a good bang for your buck to have commissioning come in, be a second set of eyes doing design reviews. Certainly there's an art form to doing it the right way, which again is a whole other seminar, but that's kind of what we're seeing is value on design reviews. How often are those design reviews, those commissioning reviews, incorporated? Was it or done in design phase? How often are they incorporated into the contract documents? And the answer, again, semi-non-scientific data, we would say about half of them are included, what we would call always or often, right? So we feel like that's a pretty good spread. When you start to pull in the sometimes those commissioning reviews are in design phase, that's 84%. So kind of a weighted average there, slightly more than half. But But there's benefit. Those design review comments are sticking. How often are the control sequences created without collaboration between the design team and commissioning? Still a fair amount of times when that happens. So about 2/3 of the time, control sequences are done without much collaboration, and we feel like that's something where commissioning is great from the standpoint of we get to see the back end of jobs. So those control sequences, we can see if they are truly, what are the best practices of multiple design teams and what works and what doesn't, right? We have hands-on experience of that. So we really feel like if commissioning can be a part of the feedback loop back to design teams, that would add some value to the scenario. How often does new construction commissioning meet with facility personnel? So here's here again, collaboration is key, and collaboration early is key. So how often do we get to meet with facility folks and get their input on system level kind of conversation? The answer is 35% of the time. It's never or rarely. Sometimes gets a little more play. So so it's if you were to weight the average, it's slightly less than 50% of the time we get facility. So I think from the new construction commissioning, from the commissioning provider side, we feel like that's an opportunity to help drive that conversation. As you go into the...
We do have a question about that, actually. The question is, when the statistics are weighted, what are they weighted by? Do you know?
I mean, it's just the number of survey results by the, so like obviously you can't weight rarely, often, and sometimes, but when you get into the percentage levels, right? So what we're trying to say is the number of respondents under the 20, so we took an average, so if it was 10%, 30%, 50%, 70%, 90%, right? And we had so many respondents under each of those buckets, that's kind of how it was weighted to say, in general, and again, not the most scientific approach. The disclaimer there is there was two parts of the survey. One was Berkeley's survey, which was highly scientific, and then there was BCA did a supplemental survey that was more of a market survey that was trying to just kind of get additional data points without the LB&L survey was 434 lines of input, which freaked people out. And so in order to try to grab data both ways, we did a simpler survey with the BCA side in order to just, again, try to get a couple different levels. So I'll admit that this one's not plus or minus, 2.6%, but yes, it was a weighted average on where we could get percentages in our response.
Great.
And the rest of it's a bit of a gut feel when you talk about sometimes, always, never, right? So again, you can kind of look at this graph and say, are we doing coordination meetings during submittals between all interested parties? And the weighted bell curve average says it happens about half the time in general. How many times does commissioning issues remain open? So when we get to TCO, are we able to finish all these issues, or do we carry some of them forward into occupancy? The answer is, there's still quite a few things that get left over. So closing those issues, driving contractors to finish is still an issue inside of our industry. So now we didn't say how many. I would say that's less than probably 10% of the total, but there's still always lingering things that we're dealing with. Another question, which is a little bit of a lead piece, is how often is a post-turnover occupant survey of satisfaction conducted for jobs that have commissioning tied to it that they're aware of? It happens fairly rarely, we would say, about 1/3 of the time. So getting that feedback from the owners, right? Obviously, lead is evolving to get more feedback after the contractor walks off the job. So as of last year, we'd say that's still an opportunity, right? How often are ongoing? So ongoing commissioning is taking the commissioning process into warranty and beyond. again, a whole nother webinar. But how often do those tasks get included after warranty is complete? And so this is after the 1-year warranty typically. So about 20% of the time it happens very often or better. 56% of the time it happens never or rarely. So again, kind of that market penetration of something to 25 to 33% of OCX starting to get into the process. So some of the takeaways: design phase services in about 60% of the projects that our responders said. However, the documents, the commissioning review comments are incorporated about 80% of the time, so we feel like there's high value there. Design phase issues are about 25% of the overall new construction issues, but there's opportunities that we're seeing. So, how do we improve? How do we improve? The work that we need to do within our own industry to add value, right? So I'll pause there because that's new construction. And
yep, I do have a question for you. It is, what is the average time it takes to commission a job? I ask because we have to build in time to have personnel working with you on the BAS side. So it sounds like that's coming from a controls contractor.
Sure. So that's a big it depends question. Depends on the number of systems, depends on the complexity of the system. So commissioning is a process from beginning to end. It's not a one-time event. So commissioning is involved in design reviews. Commissioning is involved in submittal reviews, inspections, functional testing, startup inspections, functional testing, et cetera. Right. So the PC answer is commissioning really attempts to we're not here to slow down the construction schedule. We're here to help speed it up, right? However, there is time that we need. So time for meetings, time to address, punch lists, and then certainly the functional testing piece is a piece where it's two folks on a bucket and a laptop in a mech room, working through the functional test procedures. So there's some time, right? There's weeks, and again, depends on if we're talking about a school with 10 rooftop units, or if we're talking about a data center with a whole bunch of other stuff in it. So there's a time period certainly needs to be added in, and it really, I think that's where you got to really talk to your commissioning providers about. You tell me, what kind of time frame you're going to need from me, or certainly, as that gets into the specifications, that needs to be well defined. That we think that functional testing is going to require an extra 3 weeks of manpower from the contractor to prove testing, right?
We actually got that. We got that comment submitted that they think it would be fair to ask how many functional performance test hours CXP is counting on. So maybe when the CXP is bidding the job, they can share that information.
Sure. I mean, it goes back to the idea of sampling, right? So, and even the poll question you had is Murphy's Law, right? The ones you don't test are the ones that you have issues with. So, where's the value? If the value is central plant, air handlers, big stuff, if you really want to get into the VAV boxes, you want to get into the terminal equipment, because, and that goes back to the evolution of the commissioning process, right? In the olden days, 10 years ago, it was somebody on a ladder, somebody at the computer, and you're doing visual inspections of point-to-point and functional test sequences. Now, recognizing we got to do it faster, and we got to cover everything. That's the owner's expectation. So, how do you incorporate monitoring-based commissioning, to be able to, can we test heating and cooling systems of 500 VAV boxes just by running sequences and watching trend data and doing fault diagnostics, right? So there's ways to add value, and again, it's the approach, right? And that's a lot on the owner and the team and how they expect, how critical is the equipment, how do we want to get this all tested out? There's ways to do it fast and slow, and samples and all sorts of things. So.
Great. We have a couple more questions, Tom.
Yes.
The next one is, this material talks about reduced commissioning costs. At the same time, the data notes problems completing the commissioning process. Do you believe these two are related?
I think my short answer is no. I think there's always, you think about every building that you've ever done, right? Has it been 100% delivered at the end of the job? In my 27-year career, the answer is no, not really. There's always something. I would say that answer is a little skewed because, again, what we didn't ask in that answer was, well, how many problems are you having? Are you talking about 10 leftover issues, or are you talking about 200? And so that's probably skewing that result a little bit. Certainly, certainly with design fees, right? Commissioning is all about the less that we charge, the fewer hours that we apply. There's risk, but I would say they're probably not as interrelated as maybe I implied.
Oh man, I'm just getting more questions, so this is good. We're spurring conversation. So there's a lot of data coming from, oh, sorry, hang on. All right, got it. So there's a lot of data from all the survey results past to present. What new information was Lawrence Berkeley or the BCA able to come away with? What changes are a takeaway from the industry from 2004 to 2009 to today?
Well, that's I guess I would say read the white paper to a degree. So some of the takeoffs is that, yes, the market, I think, is maturing, but we're also seeing that commissioning providers are not necessarily the demand for commissioning is getting greater, not less, and so the commoditization of commissioning services is always an issue, as it would be with design services, right? So the commissioning industry needs to figure out ways, and we are working on ways to do more with less, right? To provide value. So, like I said, I think some of it is what's our value proposition, and that's what we're trying to come away with. Is here's ways where we're doing, here's ways that we are improving schedule, improving building performance. So some of it is a marketing scenario, right? Some of it is education to the owner, right? Because that's the question: is owners will say, as with design, right? What's it cost, right? What's the scope? What's it cost? So that's what we're trying to do, is defend what that is. And there's pros and cons to all of it. Again, a big piece of it too is self-reflection, right? So we wanted to get feedback from the industry to be able to say, what are we doing well and what are we not doing well? And there are certainly things that we want to continue to work on. So there's a lot that we're getting out of the survey. Again, whether it's cost or market evaluation or scope of work benefits or adjustments that we need to make. And so the survey has definitely given us lots to chew on.
All right. Did the survey results come up with an average payback for new construction commissioning projects?
So that's an interesting question, because if you read the 2004, 2009 surveys, studies, there is a payback value that Berkeley had published. We asked the question of what was the cost, or well, obviously the cost piece is easy. Everybody can tell me what that is. The question is, to the industry, is what did new construction commissioning save? And I got high level benefits, right? Schedule improvement and indoor air quality, blah, blah, blah. But when I asked the question of give me real cash, what did you really save on this job, whether it was energy or maintenance or whatever? And that question is very hard to get a response to. And that's honestly probably my biggest surprise out of this whole exercise, was at least a couple years, 2 years ago, and even I still think that's a problem, right? On the new construction side of it, we are not, as an industry, doing a good job of touting our own horn of the value of what we did, right? I mean, And certainly LEED recognizes that, and they're driving more of the ability to benchmark and to to tie energy modeling results, theoretical results tied to actual results, right? And that's a big piece of what we're working through now is prove it, right? Prove that you have a code compliant office building, and you did commissioning and it saved you 5% energy savings. Right now, that's not a scope that our members are paying much attention to. Now, spoiler alert, they pay a ton of attention to it in existing building commissioning. It's the #1 reason, which again is somewhat ironic. But it's certainly, so sorry, I got down a rabbit hole. The short answer is I don't think we had enough data on energy savings or maintenance cost savings to where we felt comfortable, at least at our level, to publish a payback number. I will say that Berkeley has their study, their white paper, which is still in review with the Department of Energy. So in theory, they have more information on that that will be coming out whenever that gets approved by the DOE. So I would say stay tuned. I would say that probably the payback is not as good as it was when it was published in 2009, but it's still, in my mind and in Berkeley's mind, is not enough data to really feel confident in the results.
One of the comments from the audience is that we don't know how much money is being saved because the owners aren't asking for that to be analyzed or calculated.
Sure, yeah. 100%, right? And so again, as a commissioning provider, if they say, well, what's the benefit, right? Well, how much is it? How much do we drive a process, right? We have projects that have energy models tied to it, right? We have projects which we're driving more and more system level metering, right? We're required in many cities, including the city that everybody here sits in, to report benchmarking information once a year. So the requirement for gathering this information is kind of there. I mean, there's loose ends. It's just a matter of somebody being purposeful in gathering that information. And at this point, you're right. I mean, the industry is not getting paid to get that information, and it's coming through loud and clear that we're not gathering it right now. But I think that's
it's hard to quantify that data. That's part of the biggest issue. I know we've tried it in our office, and always the question being asked. So
sure.
Next question is, you indicated 6% energy cost savings from commissioning. What is the baseline? So hopefully a simple question for you.
6% cost savings.
I think that was just it was in an earlier slide about, let me see if I can scroll back.
Yeah, I'd have to. So I think we're saying this one, right? Is that what we're talking about? I know the person who asked the question is probably not on the line or not muted, but so the baseline to this part for new construction is survey results from 2009 and survey results from 2018. There's another metric tied to existing building commissioning that does have a similar metric, but we're not there yet.
Okay. Will implementing ASHRAE 36 2018 Advanced HVAC Sequences Guidelines reduce commissioning time with additional AFDD and checks and improve system performance?
So anytime that you standardize control sequences, it will reduce design time and testing time. Of course, the question is, will an architect ever build a building the same twice? And the answer is probably not. So sure, so anytime we standardize, there is benefit to that. Fault diagnostics, certainly, again, like I talked about, fault diagnostics is a good way to gather 100% sample data very quickly. There's trade-offs in terms of the technology side of implementation, but comparing it to two people in a ladder and a radio, yes, there's economic benefit that we're seeing for that process.
All right. So short answer, how do you convince the owner to pay additional fees for MBCx, so monitoring-based commissioning, to be able to test 100% and find issues beyond substantial completion? Which is probably a good segue as we get into existing building commissioning.
So some of that just goes back to the criticality of the systems, right? So if there are critical spaces that really demand performance and documented performance, then that's part of the conversation. You know, I think a lot of us on the provider side, to a degree, you sort of go down this road of you have to demonstrate the value, whether it's new construction or ongoing commissioning. I think you have to do it once with an owner, right? I don't think an owner, especially a super educated owner, will understand it. But one that isn't educated, haven't gone through the process before, a lot of times you have to take them through the process. You have to show them the graph and the results on the back end. And once they do it once, then they're hooked, I think, and they do it more often. So some of it is case study and showing the benefits for other projects, and surveys and studies like this to be able to say, yeah, we're seeing value. We're seeing a payback tied to ongoing commissioning, existing building commissioning that the industry stands behind. Great.
All right, with that, as we transition to existing building commissioning, I'm going to launch the previous question of which of the markets do you engage with for existing building commissioning: higher ed, office, commercial, healthcare, inpatient, or K through 12? And again, you can submit multiple answers with this.
So one of the things too, Fiona, I want to do is a bit of a time check, because I think we're
at 6:26 locally. Our meeting is scheduled to go till 7 o'clock. Right. So we do have some time.
Okay. I do appreciate the questions, and I love the back and forth. So I don't want to disregard that, but I also don't want to go all night.
Right.
So I think sensitive to that.
I'm going to close the survey and our results. So existing building side, seeing more participation in the commercial and healthcare industry.
Okay.
Oh, and apparently that was only one choice allowed, so I apologize for that. Take your best bet. All right, I think we're ready to move on.
Okay. All right, so I'll roll through existing building commissioning. Again, same scenarios: cost information, market demand, and scope of work. Again, looking at what's changed over the last few surveys and what's the drivers in the market and how do we improve our scope. So the same sort of information in terms of cost per square foot tied to existing building commissioning. So the question then leads to, where did you get your data, right? Which is always interesting. We were able to get, and there's 660 buildings that we got usable data on. So, but a lot of it was tied to specific utility programs. So there was utility programs on the West Coast. ComEd was one of them. Was one of the programs. Canada had programs and so forth. So we did have utility-specific program information, and then we had a utility program that was monitoring-based commissioning, which is the one on the left, and then we had a block of data that was just not utility-specific. And so what's interesting is when you look at the data, utility information was really compacted, right? And you can see the overall. So the overall was 26 cents a square foot. Again, big disclaimers coming later, but utility costs were typically lower, which is not a surprise because utilities, they want their bang for the buck, right? So they will typically drive a leaner scope, and a leaner scope, I think, translates into less energy savings, and I'll try to use the next couple of slides to prove that thesis. Again, building size has some effect on this. So in the buildings that we had, if you look at the square footage piece, the bigger the building, the smaller the building, the bigger the cost per square foot. That's not really a surprise, I would say. So again, use the range and use building size as your roadmap when you answer that question. When you said the 6% number, this is what I was thinking of. So when you look at the median savings, percent savings tied to existing building commissioning, again, we kind of took BCx a little bit off the table with this, and we just looked at existing building commissioning only. The utility scenarios, one utility was 5% savings, another one was showing 9% savings, and then the other, which is more of a, I'll say it's a Cadillac version, but that's what I mean, is a more robust existing building commissioning scope. We were seeing better savings, right? So the savings values were in the 14% range if you were able to do more scope, right? And so that value is also a little bit less than the initial 2009 savings value. They were showing about a 10% benefit. Again, this is driven harder by I think by the utility company results, which again I think are a little more mature markets. So then you look at the payback. So how does that all translate cost and savings to payback? We're finding the median payback value in our recent survey, 300 buildings, about 2.2 years. That is up from 2009. Still a good value, though. I think if you can make the argument that typically, well, I guess that is a question: is well, what's that threshold where owners will pay attention and do something? Here's the answer to that question. So we asked the question: what does it take for an owner to really go to implementation? So the orange scenario is for projects that are 2 years or less in payback. So what we're finding is the weighted average, again, is that they would implement it over half the time. Any kind of project that you presented that was 2 years or less, they would typically go for it more often than not. But as you can imagine, as the payback goes down, and 2 years is always a bit of the magic number, it seems, and it continues, I think, to be. So if you raise that payback to 3 to 4 years, we're seeing that about a third of the time it's implemented. And if it's 5 years or greater on the payback side, it's even less, more towards 18% of the time, weighted average, that implementation actually goes forward.
Tom, do you think that payback has gone up in part due to a lot of the low-hanging fruit over the last 10 years has been addressed, and that these might be repeat projects?
I think there's some of that. I was going to say maybe I have some of those answers in future slides, but I think there's reasons, certainly. Like I said, I think the biggest driver is that the biggest amount of information that we got back was tied to very specific utility EBCx programs. So I think if you want the distilled version of it, is the utility program EBCx, I think is good for anywhere from 5 to 10% energy savings in a building. If you're able to add more scope, which would be things like greater functional testing, adding on test and balance to the mix, things like that, deeper levels of testing, then you're going to find, like I said, our median was about 14%. So you always kind of say 10 to 20% is what you can expect. And then, of course, again, go back to energy engineering 101, right? You benchmark and you kind of figure out, is this a 5% saver? Is this a 50% saver? So yeah, I think we've been working on improving the outliers, but there's always opportunity, right? You can present a 20% energy savings or 15% energy savings in a 2-year payback. I still think that's a pretty good sales pitch to an owner. So again, the reasons why owners decided to implement existing building commissioning, a lot of it was tied to energy savings is by far the biggest reason, which again, irony compared to new construction. System performance, thermal comfort, indoor air quality. So again, EBCx is still a lot about, I got to fix the building, I got to improve performance, and I want to use energy savings to pay for it. So other reasons that where again, this is the things that are outlined are more of what changed vastly between 09 and 18. So here are the things that jumped up. So ensuring building performance got way more love than it did 10 years ago. Rebates are still out there, so it's still driving even more so than 10 years ago. You know, as with new construction, you know, organizational mandates, things like that are driving it probably more than it was. Extending equipment life is also a factor. So maintenance is starting to add more teeth to it as we go. So some of the scope of work specific questions that we asked. So we asked some softball questions. So work cost and energy savings included with existing building commissioning? The answer is almost 2/3 of the time they're usually in there in every scope almost 2/3 of the time, and you know, and the weighted average is probably obviously more like 3/4 of the time. So yes, that's energy savings is still a big piece of the puzzle. The question is, you know, you get a building, oftentimes you have to do things to fix the building before you can even do existing building commissioning. There's you know, trend data, you know, there's controls capability, you know, trending analysis, broken control actuators, stuff like that, where it's like, let's just fix this first so that I can even start to do my analysis. So, you know, so how bad are the buildings to begin with? The answer is kind of bad, actually. I mean, 87% of the time, we're always doing something before we start to get the building to a point where we can do our process, which is interesting. Test and balance. So now we go into the how often, you know, is there value into adding more analysis, more process to existing building commissioning? So test and balance is often an existing process. 75% of the time, it's reported to be in an EBCx scope with some regularity, right? And more than 1/3 of the time, it's often or better. You know, so TAB is in there quite a fair amount. Going back to your poll question, so how often, you know, at what level, right? More is better until you get the bill. So the scenario of, do we look at just central plants? Do we look at air handlers? Do we look at both? Do we include some terminal equipment, or do we include everything, right? So the scenario that is done more often is we do some amount of terminal unit, but by and large we sample it. You know, there's only about 10%, a little more than 10% of the time where our survey would say we sample it, or, you know, we do tab on everything as part of EBCx. So a little bit of a price point there. Going back to the results. So what things are we finding? And this is coming out of the 09 study. So this is an update to that, asking the question, what are the measures, right, that we're finding? And so I think the good news is it hadn't changed much. It's still the same top 5 things in 09 are the things that we're still dealing with. So sequence of operations issues, set points, control sequence issues, resets, things like that. You know, it's back to the low-hanging fruit. A lot of times it's still a lot of what we look at, in addition to mechanical fixes and bigger things. But yeah, the real heart of it still is controls. And how do we address it? Typically through a controls contractor, although there's a mix. You know, so there's some in-house, there's some where the provider itself will provide the implementation. But having a contractor, mechanical, electrical, or controls in your back pocket to actually fix the problem is still an important part of getting results, right? So the results in energy savings, the median energy savings was typically 6%. The range published in the last study is anywhere from 3 to 11%. That's everything combined. But we would say that our results say that EBCx outside of utility programs are providing more energy savings, raw energy savings, but again, it's also at a higher cost, right? So, so the median is down, but in looking at the type of projects, the project types are not appreciably different. The sizes are probably a little bigger. So there was that, you know, again, cost per square foot is still an issue, right? So I mean, you want to pay attention to that one particular slide for smaller buildings. again, the range 1 to 4 year payback, 2.2 at a median, 26 cents a square foot. Again, the typical range anywhere from 15 to 56 square footage, and type of building and scope have a lot to do with that. But again, even though you have lower savings, it's the median, you know, we're still finding good payback, and the value of existing building commissioning still seems to be strong. Again, the owner's reasons for implementing it are not any different from the 09 study, and the top 5 measures from the 09 study are still the top 5 measures and accounts for 95% of the things, at least that were reported to us in the study. So the more things change, the more they stay the same to a degree. I guess I'll stop there. Any questions on existing building commissioning?
We do not have any additional questions right now.
Okay. So there's a lot of data in these surveys. And again, this is only showing you the results from the BCxA study and a little bit of Berkeley's. So the Lawrence Berkeley National Labs white paper is again, hopefully will be released later this year. But if you're looking to find more backup information, so when we did our research for this project, when we built our white papers for the project, if you go to our website, this is where a lot of that information is found. So you go to our resources, our knowledge center, there's a page that's dedicated to the value of commissioning project. And so technical narratives, presentations, research, blogs and things like that are there. So, you know, like I said, I threw a lot of data, which is the purpose of a survey, but if you want more information, feel free to check out our results here.
We do have a question, a ponder, I'll say. I wonder if opportunities may come for commissioning services in certain existing buildings, for example, a large health club facility that reopens after the COVID-19 shutdown, whenever that occurs. Any comment to that?
Lots of conversation going on right now within the industry of you have buildings that are not being used. So number one, you know, having that opportunity to jump in and do preventive maintenance, you know, things like that, it's a good opportunity to do it. Certainly, as you're bringing buildings online, certainly, you know, more people more qualified than me will give you, you know, ideas as far as what the new normal should look like in terms of outside air and filtering and UV and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think there's you know, 2 sides of it. One is as a building is available, you know, can you kind of prove to an owner that energy savings is possible? And then certainly as you bring it back online and put it back into service, you know, there's preventive maintenance issues and things like that absolutely, you know, everyone on the phone, I think, would love the opportunity to get in and fix buildings, you know, as they are available. Obviously, budgets and things like that will probably dampen that parade quite a bit, but yeah. So there's absolutely, you know, the funny thing about the economy, right, is when the economy is great, new construction is great, new construction commissioning is great. When the economy goes in the tank, at least in my 27 years, that's when existing buildings gets more, the demand for that gets more and more, right? So there's opportunity to improve building performance anywhere you look, right? You can look out your window and you can see 5 really crappy buildings. So yeah, I would think there's an emphasis on existing buildings and in improving performance, especially given our strange times that we're living in.
All right, any other questions? Otherwise, I think we will probably wrap this up. There is a survey result, a survey that comes up. I believe it will prompt you at the end of the presentation to fill it out. You may also get an email. Please fill that out. We really appreciate everybody that has called in. I'm not seeing any other questions come in, Tom, so thank you again so much for speaking with us. I'm sorry that this wasn't in person and we couldn't have you out here, but
no, it's fully understandable. There's my contact information. So if you think of another question down the line, feel free to send me an email. Certainly, you know, more information and tied to commissioning is tied to the Building Commissioning Association. So, yeah, let us know how we can help, and I do appreciate the invitation.
Yep, and the presentation will be available on our website after this. So thank you, everyone, and have a great night.